Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. I don't think Talon realizes I've been in sessions for the last couple of hours before this. And
Oh, yeah.
he just, because he had sent me a couple of texts and I hadn't responded. And he just said, "Hey, baby, please let me know you're safe."
Oh, yeah. Respond.
He said, "I haven't heard from you much today. And I know there's been big emotions this morning." Oh my gosh. I'm so lucky.
Sweet guy. I know. I just sent a totally fruitless long paragraph to a situationship about how when you ignore my affectionate messages, it makes me feel like you don't want that with me, and you don't have to want that with me, but like, then don't do the other stuff with me, bud. We've had this conversation.
Oh man, that was a sort of dear man. When this happens, I feel.
Yeah. Yes. Dude, I'm trying, Sarah. I am trying.
Love it. I love it. Okay. Hi, guys. Welcome back. It's Sarah and Leslie. And we started talking, and I just thought, okay, we just need to record on this. So we were talking about, the initial conversation was about suicidal ideation, which turned into like masking your experience as borderline and masking not just being a thing that people with autism do or people with ADHD do. Which ironically, both Leslie and I have ADHD. But before we get started, I just wanted to tell you about this experience yesterday, if I could. I went grocery shopping for the first time in a couple of weeks, and I drove like into town to where there's a real grocery store. And I was minding my own business, pushing my cart, whatever. And this lady and her husband turned and stopped me, and she said, "Hey, I can tell you're grocery shopping alone. I just want you to know to please be safe and look out for someone who," like, she was like a taller, like, white man with like a black jacket, has like sort of, I've just noticed that he's sort of been like following whatever. Anyways, and I had so many thoughts because I realized I haven't thought about something like that in so long, because being way out on the peninsula in a tiny town, that's not something that I really experience here. But then how fucking sad that I have to have somebody tell me in the grocery store as a single unit grocery shopping to like look out for myself. But then also I was grateful, but it made me feel a little nervous walking around. And I just thought, I can't wait to tell Leslie about this.
Yeah, that's like almost something that happens in a movie, like like I feel that gives me like horror movie vibes a little bit, like, just so you know. Like, but it touches on the sort of theme of masking and like the ways in which, for me, I don't know if this happens for you, but like I often think that I am masking really, really well. And then somebody will do something like that, kind of where they will come up to me or they'll say something to me and it'll make me realize like, oh, do I look like a target? Do I look like somebody who's about to be taken advantage of, And is that just because they think I look really nice and kind or something? Or is there something that people can see about me that I can't see and I can't see it, so I can't hide it?
I know. Yeah, it's interesting how you immediately go to like this sense of how you present in your body, like as if, like, one of the things I think we were taught when we were younger, I don't know if Gen Z is having the same programming, but like if you're pretty, you need to protect yourself more than if you're not. If you're skinny, if you're whatever. And I was just thinking, like, I look like the biggest dyke in the world right now. I have like a Rolling Stone t-shirt on, a green sports bra you can see, and like baggy skate pants, like I can skateboard, which I can't skateboard, and Birkenstocks with socks on. I was like, and nothing about me is attractive right now from a stereotypical like social norm, straight hetero perspective. So then I had to stop and be like, but does that mean you're not pretty? Or does that mean that prettiness has nothing to do with being targeted by someone? Which at the end of the day, I think both are probably true.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. That is like very much like that's very much that kind of like reflex in me is like a really old pattern that I have noticed. And it is something that I've been working with a lot recently, where like I do automatically go to like making myself the problem. Like in any situation, like I'm always the one who's doing something wrong. And so I think that's one reason why that's where my mind goes, like it also taps into this need to like control the way people perceive me and the ways in which I think it just indicates how like there's this constant process of like calibration that occurs when you're a woman in public, and you're always sort of in public because you're always subjected to the male gaze, even when you're alone, you're still observing yourself through the male gaze as well. And I can't take credit for that idea, and I can't remember which author I read it from, but yeah. So I think that that's one reason why my mind goes that way at first. And like the more sort of visible you are, the more sort of aware of that process you are. But even when we think even when we think we're sort of flying incognito and, like that's still going on,
Yeah, sort of always thinking about how successful am I being with my masking. Like, I always feel like I'm both doing a great job and everybody in the world can see what a fucking disaster shit show piece of, dust in the universe that I am. And all of the distorted thinking that happens when you have borderline, the self-hate, the self-shame, the constant like ridiculing of yourself makes it really hard to determine if I am masking in a way that actually helps me be safe, or if I am masking in a way that hurts me because it's preventing relationships.
I love that you say that, because that tendency of mine to make myself the problem in things has absolutely obliterated my relationships as an adult. And it's totally a form of masking that was very, very successful as a child, and sort of as I developed. When we were talking before we started recording, we touched on the ways in which the social roles that you are sort of forced to take on when you have borderline, they sort of reinforce this idea of being too much and of not being okay as you are. It's sort of like the masking is simultaneously this really necessary piece to keep you safe, and at the same time it's really keeping you ill. And when we were talking about how this plays into suicidal ideation, in that nobody wants to be in that position for, years, decades on end. And so this way in which we can throw all of these treatments at borderline, but at some level, we have to recognize that one of the things that makes the condition so unpleasant and so distressing is other people and the way that we have to behave around them.
Oh my God, yes. And I had never thought about masking from an SI perspective, because that just seems so normal for so long that I never applied that masking lens, which I really have only learned about in the last year or two, because it's more common to talk about neurodiversity now. But one of the things that I very frequently feel, and I hope people listening know that me saying this is not an indicator that I'm not safe. I am safe. I am not currently suicidal. I have a very strong plan in place. It's important that I say that. Anyways, when I am suicidal or just having ideation, I have this urge that is taking over my whole fucking body to text my mother and be like, you have no fucking idea what a miserable fucking existence this is. And the only reason I stay alive is because you will hurt too much if I kill myself, because you've already experienced so much suicide. But maybe if you fucking knew how bad this was, and the fact that I don't feel like I can do this for fucking 50 more years. And this is the reason I'll never be able to mother and have a normal fucking life that I want to have. Like, maybe then you would give me permission to go. Like, that's what I want to say to her. But I don't get to say that to her because she doesn't get to live with that. Like, I don't want her to live with that. It's not fair to her. It doesn't change anything. She's never going to give me permission to kill myself, like, and I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know if I really want that anyways. But that is one of those things of like, if people really knew what it was like, would they have the same shaming people experience around suicide? Because it's sort of like you can have done everything and given it your all, and it still doesn't feel like worthy of staying. But we stay. And eventually, I'm pretty sure there's fucking joy. There has been joy for me. So if anybody listening is like thinking that I'm giving them permission to die by suicide, that is not what I'm doing. I'm just talking about my experience.
Hey there, I'm Bellamy Young. I'm an actor and a producer. I've been working with the global humanitarian organization CARE, and I am so excited to invite you along for my new podcast, She Leads with CARE. Each week, you'll meet some incredible women who have changed their lives and their communities.
We raise our voices for people who don't raise their voices to defend themselves.
Listen to She Leads with CARE now on your favorite podcast platform. New episodes every Tuesday.
Yes, I think that's an important disclaimer. And also sort of touched on the difference between sort of passive suicidal ideation and more active, and how I really feel like suicide has a role as like a pressure relief valve. It's a really important out to know that, again, like if I try everything and it's still not working and I'm still this miserable, like I have something. And like, I don't think that a lot of folks who don't have this diagnosis or similar diagnoses, I just think that their frame of reference, that it's really hard to bridge that gap if you haven't had that experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting how masking is helpful at times, not from a relationship perspective, but from a work perspective. Because people often ask me, like, how do you like sit with it, right? Like, I listen to terrible stories every week. I have seen terrible photos in medical records that I would never want anybody to listen to. There are foods that I can't eat because of the reminders of children being sexually trafficked that food has to deal with, like, has to do with. Someone was asking me, like, how do you sit with it? And I was like, you just do. Like they were like, do you get taught that in college? And it's like, I mean, I don't know, maybe. I don't really remember. I was drunk through all of it, but you just learn to switch. You just learn to be like, I have to sit here. I have to be present with you. I have to listen. I have to offer you something in return. This is sort of a co-created space where my job is to be neutral. And I'm really good at that for the most part. I'm not always neutral, but I don't talk about myself, right? And then you go back out into the world and you're like, fuck, man, how did I do that? And it's just this like in that way, masking is really helpful. But in other ways, like I'm so isolated. We made one friend out here. And that's my only friend. Like, I don't have any friends from back home, like I don't have any significant relationships in my life. And that's my doing. You know, that's my inability to like let myself be seen, because like it's too scary to think about being rejected. It's too awful to think about like self-hate being reinforced and all of those things.
No, that touches on another point I kind of have been mulling around when I've been thinking about this topic, of how like people tend to think about our brains and our capacity to learn as like this sort of constant blank slate, you know? And I feel like a lot of the time people blame individuals when they act according to the sort of sum of their accumulated experiences. We rush to pathologize people with social anxiety. If in every social environment you have entered, you have been ostracized or backstabbed or whatever other nasty things that humans will do to each other, if that's been your experience in almost, it doesn't even have to be every social environment you've entered, even if it's just most of the social environments you've entered, any human with a functional brain and nervous system would develop an aversion to going into social situations if that's what they have to face every single time. And at some point, we are advocating for people to harm themselves by telling them to continue throwing themselves into that unmasked and just, you know, whoever sticks will stick and whoever's your people will be your people. Like, that's a lovely sentiment, but that is not real life.
No. I actually think that I have an interesting example, and I think that you'll like resonate with this. Obviously, my relationship with my family is very complicated. My mom is very, I think, anxious and afraid. And she's very quiet and she's very reserved. She is a person of very few words. And she's got a very flat affect, but I don't think I know that none of that is intentional. And she either has a flat affect or a really emotional affect, but she doesn't talk about it. Actually, I think she really intellectualizes it now that I think about it. Anyways, my mom's sister, my aunt, is more like me. She's very expressive, very emotional. You know how she feels. She's very expressive in her communication of love, even when it's sort of like not consistent with like what's happening in the moment. Like, so my grandmother, my mom, and my aunt came up to Shores to go to the beach. And they stopped by Talon's restaurant. And Talon got to meet my aunt. And I have told Talon before, I always felt like I wished that my aunt was my mom growing up. And if my mom's listening, I don't feel like that. Actually feel like that. But I hope that you can understand the experience. So Talon met my aunt, and my aunt like hugs Talon and is like holding him and is like, thank you for taking such good care of my niece. She's like the whole world, you know, I just love her so much. And we went home and he was like, I can understand now why you wanted like your aunt to be more of a maternal figure. She speaks to you in a language, like a love language that makes sense to you. And you don't have to mask around her the same way you do with your mom.
That is huge, especially, I mean, that's really touching on like one of like the really core roots of borderline, which is parental misattunement, you know, and that's a huge one. And I think that has been like.
Will you explain misattunement for people?
Yes, totally. Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. So parental misattunement is kind of like one of the core chunks that explains the sort of sliver of borderline that develops outside of any really obvious sort of abuse or neglect, right? Like there are some people who can't really pinpoint anything truly sort of that felt abusive in their past, you know, whether or not something really abusive did happen or not. Like, but what they did experience is this thing called misattunement, which is where your parent, their nervous system, like, I'll use an example. I'll use myself as an example. My mom, she was beaten throughout her pregnancy with me. She was homeless. She was threatened by multiple people in her life. CPS was called in the hospital. She was threatened with legal action to have me taken away if she didn't leave my father like that day. So, and then obviously she was dealing with a pretty gnarly case of postpartum depression as well. So myself as a baby, me as a stimulus to my mom was highly aversive. I mean, almost intolerably aversive. And this happens, especially in cases with abuse and everything else like what I had going on.
And that's because you were a reminder of that time to your mom. Is that what you think?
Yeah. And also just like as a stimulus to her nervous system, it was just like, just she was so dysregulated herself that having this like thing that is basically, you're still really a part of your parents. I mean, in a lot of indigenous cultures, this is well understood. It's something like a baby doesn't even realize that they're their own organism until they're like 3 months old or something. Like, you are still literally, you're like a little angler fish, still hanging, like just because you're born doesn't, that separation takes longer to happen. And so while that process of differentiation is going on, if there's misattunement where your parent is not able to meet you in your nervous system state and then help you co-regulate with you, if they're not, if nobody is able to return back down to baseline, then there's no way to really meet and experience co-regulation, which is how we bond and we create relationships. And this takes on different shapes, obviously, as you age as a child, and the way you interact with your parent changes, because you gain speech and you gain movement and, all these other things. And so not only can that happen because of like experiential stuff, it's also like a temperamental thing, which came out more so as I got older, my mom and me, like my dad likely had antisocial personality disorder. He had obviously lots of, run-ins with the law. He really struggled in school, likely had dyslexia, a lot of stuff going on, So, but his personality, I inherited a lot of that. I inherited the risk-taking behavior, the impulsivity, a lot of other stuff, And so having that sort of temperament, but being raised by my mother, who was extremely traumatized and also not just in her adulthood as a child, she was introverted, she was bullied, she has her own sort of history of all that. So just growing up together, like, it was just like oil and water. It was really, really hard for us to meet anywhere. And that was highly traumatic.
Yeah. Wow. Dude, your ACEs score is so high. And
double digits.
Yeah. I hate to say this, and let's say it just based on the science, like the things that you have been able to achieve in your life, given, I'm going to cry, like given that amount of trauma when you were a child is like so fucking amazing. Yeah.
Thank you for saying so, Sarah, because I feel like a total deadbeat sometimes, and I know I'm not, but it's hard to compare yourself to the people around you.
Yeah, so that's a really good. And you're the youngest too, right? You have an older sister?
I'm an only child, so it was just me and mom growing up, which was its own thing.
I thought you had another sibling.
I have an aunt who is younger than me.
Okay, got it.
And that's also its whole own thing about my grandmother. She had a child after mom had me. So my aunt is younger than me. That's why you're thinking.
Okay, got it.
I know, it's a whole thing. My family's a little weird.
Well, yeah. And so like one of the things I had to do in my household growing up was mask, because my father's very avoidant, like extreme avoidant. And my mom is not. But it's not like we were oil and water so much as it was just like, we're very similar, but the way in which we present it is so different. And so her being so soft and so quiet was really like triggering and left me feeling invalidated and rejected. So I would either like fight or mask, but my mom wasn't fighting back. And then my father would sort of step in if I did something that was like not okay or dysregulating towards my mom, right? So that all of that is sort of like wonky because you don't know when to mask. And then it sounds like with your mom, it's just like you guys could really like go at it. And did you mask or how did you mask?
Yeah. I I dissociated a lot. I really, and I think that was my masking in large part for most of growing up. There are large parts of my childhood that are just gone, and I don't remember them. I just remember being very subdued, and so I would end up in situations where, like, I wouldn't say no, And so, like, and I keep on thinking of these like anecdotes. There's one time I can remember, I must have been in like first grade or something. And I had to ride the school bus we were living in Seattle. Mom was going to the University of Washington doing her master's at the time. And these kids, like, they bullied me and peer pressured me into like eating this like gross old piece of candy that they found in like the seat, like in the school bus, And like, even at that point in my life, I just remember feeling like I had no agency whatsoever. Like I was physically incapable of saying no to these people. And ironically, then I was the one who got in trouble for doing it. I got pulled into the administration. I got, spoken to about how, we don't do that. And it's your fault for not saying no. I mean, that's like one of my earliest examples I can think of where that, and then that process just happened over and over and over again.
Also, the you should have said no statement happening that early. Like, I feel like, well, of course, back then there wasn't an understanding of what that means, like telling a girl that she should have said no, but the way in which that influences like sexual development.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask you, do you see like hypersexuality or hypersexual behavior, I guess, rather, do you see that as masking behavior?
Yeah. Totally. We touched on this a little bit in our last episode, just about how hypersexuality was like one of the only avenues I had for accessing desirability and acceptance. And so I think that in that way, it was definitely reinforced for sure. I also I didn't have any like overt sexual abuse in my childhood, but I did have a couple of episodes with children who were being sexually abused, who then brought that into play, like into their peer group, basically. And so I do feel like that wasn't really dealt with all the way. And so it kind of fucked up the way that so my attitudes towards like physical intimacy developed, But yeah, I just, and unfortunately, I am one of those people that like people have been telling me since like my mom almost put me in pageants, like I acted and danced, when I was fortunate enough to have access to those things. And I'm just somebody who people have been telling my mom since I was like 2 years old, like, oh, you're going to have trouble with that one. People just heaped on compliments about my appearance when I was younger. And for my mom, I think that was really validating for her because she grew up feeling extremely unattractive. She was bullied for her looks. Men did not treat her kindly in large part, and so I think for her, I just think that she interacted with that aspect of my personality in a very different way than I would have wanted because we just had very different experiences with it. And so I do wish in some ways that, I was more protected from that kind of talk because it was really sort of viewed as like a net positive. And I do think it influenced than my masking with the hypersexuality, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because my experience was the opposite. My experience was very like, you don't have sex unless somebody loves you. Like that was the extent of my sexual talk. And like, I don't really remember us talking much about like physical appearance. My mom was a marathoner. So like my whole life, I observed her running like 3 to 4 days a week until she got rheumatoid arthritis. And so she was always like an athlete, right? Like that didn't matter. She had short hair. Like that didn't matter to her. She liked to French braid my hair, but she never taught me how to put makeup on or like, and I wanted to shave my legs. And she was like, no, not yet, when I was in like the 6th grade or whatever. So I think like having no understanding of what sex meant and absolutely no understanding of what my body did or was supposed to do until many years and, a couple dozen partners later, probably. But during those years, I was with all of these people, and I think I developed this kind of hypersexual because it made me feel like I was pretty, or it made me feel good about myself, or it made me feel like that person like would love me because I was taught like you have sex with someone if they love you. And it's like, okay, well then I'll have sex with everybody.
Totally. I'm so happy that you said that, because when you first mentioned like that's the attitude you were sort of raised with, is like, I was like, oh, that's beautiful. That's so lovely. Of course. Yes. But there is totally a hidden side to that of then, especially as when you're young, of like, well, like the correlation goes both ways then, right? So it's like, I can have the sex and then I'll get the love, or like, then when they give me the love, they get the sex, And so there is a way in which you can, get sort of a blind spot to the fact that there are some people who don't do that. And there are some people who are absolutely capable of having sex with people that they don't love or that they're not in love with.
Yeah. Well, and it also influenced me to like, when I was looking for sex and love, then I was just looking. I wasn't asking myself, do I actually like this person or love this person? Are they a safe person? Are they a good person? And I mean, I would say 75, 80, 90 of the people I've had sex with, I don't even remember their names. You know what I mean? Like, let alone anything. Like, I only remember them if they did like a weird leapfrog toe sucking bullshit during the pandemic and were a firefighter and have crazy orange hair. Like, and I don't even remember that guy's name. So, but then I also look at some of the experiences and it's like, there was love there and there's still love there. And that I didn't feel like I was hypersexual in. Like that I was like, let's get dinner. I'd like to know you, like tell me about your daughters because you're like 52, That part maybe is hypersexualized. I have a weird thing about like men in their 50s. But anyways, so removing the hypersexuality and removing the pressure to like love or be loved then allows me to actually like have a real connection.
Yeah, I like the way you talk about that, definitely. Because there is, and I think like a lot of this has to do with like the splitting ability in borderline. And there's actually, this takes me back to something you were talking about earlier in the conversation about how like when you're sitting in session, and you're hearing these sort of gnarly, terrible stories, and you're able to sort of, like, compartmentalization is a type of split in a way. A splitting is kind of like compartmentalization, like it's dysregulated compartmentalization, we'll say. But it is good skill to have in some situations. And that is one thing that makes you uniquely suited to what you do. And that is the thing that my heart breaks for us borderlines, because it's like, it's one of the things that makes us good at what we do. I am so good at working with young kids because I know what it's like to have emotions that overwhelm me and cancel out my logical center in my brain. And I have recent experiences with that. And I have to continually accept myself in that state. And that makes me kick ass at my job. And it's so frustrating to know that some people think that that would disqualify us from what we do when it's what makes us really specially suited for it.
Yeah. Only if we can do it skillfully, though.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is the difference.
That's why we have training, and that's why we've been in therapy and, like practicing therapeutic modalities as long as we have, like this is the goal, and we're doing it.
Yes. And I have actually had to reduce my caseload in the last year by, I don't know, maybe I've gone down 10 client hours a week, probably. But I mean, that doesn't change the fact that I'm still working 50 hours a week or 45 hours a week because I have 2 jobs, because I have to.
And that's part of the skillfulness.
Exactly. Like, I was at a point where I was like, I am dreading going into sessions, and I don't have sometimes I want to be like, you know what, you're bullshitting me, and stop it. And you can't do that as a therapist. You can do it in a appropriate, skillful way. I'm a very direct therapist where I say, and I said earlier today, like, okay, I'm going to stop you and I'm going to challenge what you said. And I want you to listen to what I'm going to play back to you, essentially. Like, I'm going to tell you what you told me, and now I want you to tell me where there's distortion. But that's very different than my initial gut reaction being like, I can't fucking stand this right now because it's so clear to me. That's the transference that I think is very easy for people with borderline to have. Very, very, very easy. And I think people get very frustrated with me when I say, you need to understand why you're going into this field. Because if you're going into this field to fix things that couldn't be fixed about yourself, you will not be able to do it for the rest of your career.
No, nope.
People really push back and have gotten really angry with me. And like, I believe that people with borderline, like you said, are uniquely qualified to do this work when you're willing to look at yourself and be like, my borderline is getting in the way, and your borderline is gonna get in the way. And you have to be willing to acknowledge that, because that's what's fair.
Yeah. No, one of the best pieces of advice that a family member gave me, Julie, she's a professor. She has a PhD in psychology from UC Santa Barbara. And we were talking about biases. And that was basically what she said. She's like, I find it infinitely more useful to know about my biases or about my filters or, the lenses that I'm looking through, and to factor that in. And that is really like, that is the work that we do. Like, we are literally building a bridge, like neurologically in our brain, we are building a bridge between our emotional center and our prefrontal cortex, our logical center, And so that's like, that initial reaction that you have, that like, that's our emotional brain. But like, you have literally physically altered your brain in order to be able to stop yourself now and be able to apply a lens of skillfulness. And that's what makes you a professional. I mean, that's what makes you, good at what you do, regardless of, whatever sort of ways you've handled that situation in the past or whatnot, like.
It is hard to look back at the ways in which you're like, I probably shouldn't have said it like that. And was that my borderline? It's very easy as a clinician to like blame and shame yourself, and then have to wait a week to see that person again. But I have learned, I have learned I have to give people the responsibility to tell me if I fucked up or if it isn't working. And I say that at the beginning of the therapeutic relationship, very first appointment. I'm going to mess up. You're going to mess up. Therapy is messy. I need you to tell me if I have done or said something that didn't work. And there's been a couple people who have said, like, oof, that was really hard or whatever. But that client this morning, when I stopped and challenged them a couple of times at the end of our appointment, said, thank you so much. You're the only therapist that has ever really pushed me and doesn't just listen to me. And that is the borderline. That is where we thrive, is where like, no, I can see connections that maybe other people can't see. And if you have DBT skills, then you can really help people change their lives in a way that other clinicians haven't. So I can't sit with people and listen to them talk about their trauma and they're not ready to like process it and move on. That's not for me.
That's not good for people anyway. That's not actually helping people. Yeah.
It's not, but
some people do need it or want it. Yeah.
And that's where they're at and that's what they're ready to do. And then you help them find someone who's better suited or whatever. But anyways, I think that masking as a provider in any helping field can feel like self-betrayal at times, especially because you're hiding this entire part of your identity that forms everything about you. And also it's what you have to do to be safe and in your work. And that is a constant ethical dilemma that I think about all the time of like, because I've been told I'm bad for so long as someone who has borderline, am I doing bad work? And then am I hurting people? And that, I don't know, that is so painful and consumes my thinking, which obviously shows how much I value my work and the people that I am supporting and whatever. But I don't know. Do you experience that?
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the funny thing is that like find myself like I don't know if you find this like, but like when I'm with like my clients, or like the people I'm actually working with, I don't really, I actually feel like I don't have to mask, in part because like, I just like, I can't like, when you're working with 3-year-olds, like I can't even it's not even physically possible for me to fly off the handle in that situation, like it's just not going to happen. So for me, the masking really comes in much more so with the adults that I'm working with, or the sort of different adult aspects that you have to navigate in any job, because there's always like sort of the job you're doing, but then there's also like all of the sort of like whatever, if it's office politics or, hierarchies or, there's a structure that you're working within that always affects what you're doing. And so that's where I find the masking comes in much, much more so for me.
When you said that you had to mask with adults, but not so much with teenagers or children, I was like, yep, yes. Adults are the scary ones. They're the ones that like have had long-standing, very deeply ingrained biases, particularly about just even the word borderline. And so like I don't use that word with people. Our one friend though that we made, I can't remember if they brought it up because they're on Instagram and they see my podcast stuff, or if I brought it up and just like subtly dropped the like. Actually, we were talking about some stuff that was happening with a friend of theirs, and I said, that sounds pretty borderline-y. Just dropped it, just like, whatever. And she turned and said, actually, I wanted to talk to you about that because I know you have experience with that. And I was like, oh, fuck, I'm out. But it's okay to be out with people who are safe.
Yeah. Well, and when somebody brings it up with you like that, it's really different. For me, my big thing is like, if somebody were to bring it up sort of like, if somebody went digging and then like if somebody already had sort of an axe to grind with me, and then they went digging and then they found it to use as some sort of, like fodder to use against me or whatnot. That's sort of my biggest fear with that situation. So I can totally understand the initial reaction of like, oh, and again, it's like that. I thought I was masking well for this. I thought that I was, flying under the radar, and here I am out in the open suddenly. That's been a traumatic experience for me in the past. And so even if it was done with friendly intent, I could that would terrify me too. But
Yeah.
did it go well?
Oh yeah, totally. And I found, and you used this word earlier, I found that in our experience of building a friendship with them, they use the word community a lot, and they talk about building community a lot, especially with everything that's happening politically. And the more that I listen to them to use the words community, I realize like it's okay to start shedding some of these layers. Like when they talk, I have to trust them when they talk about community, because that's a very serious word. I don't know, like that word wasn't serious to me when I was younger, but now that word is very serious to me. And so, yeah, that's been a really interesting insight.
I feel like we have sort of like, now we have lowercase community and we have like uppercase community kind of, in terms of like, yeah, it has taken on, I'd say within the last 5-ish years or so, I've heard a lot more people talking about creating community, forming community, finding community. I organize with our local tenants union. And so that's a big part of our work, is how do we foster community with our different sort of properties and the locations that we're organizing? Because like, that's a perfect example of where like, that's not found community. That's like, those are the people who live next to you and you don't have any choice in that, And so, like, I think that having a balance of both is really important, Obviously, I don't know how much land y'all are on, but like, you don't really have neighbors, that are community. Yeah, and a lot of people are in that situation where it's like, that's just not going to happen, And so for a lot of us, we do have to sort of seek it out and form it. Like this conundrum that I have is like, okay, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. Like, if you're not being yourself, if you're masking, how are the other people like you going to find you? How are they even going to know that you're their type of people if you're not really being truthful to yourself? And that's one that I go back and forth on a lot. And that is going to become a lot more important as the political climate that we're in continues. We're going to have to find more and more covert ways of signaling what sort of side or group we are on. And there are a lot of ways that people do that already.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have to run in a few, but I had a thought, which was when we mask, we're actually increasing our risk for some of those like blowout, like losing friendships kind of situations, because like if somebody doesn't know that you struggle with these things, but then all of a sudden they show up and the other person has no context for it, of course they have more of a likelihood to be like, yeah, deuces, not interested.
I would argue that's one of the main reasons why borderlines tend to have a history of unstable relationships, And again, I really feel like that is one of those ways in which the way that we are socialized to behave in relationships makes borderline so much worse through no fault of our own.
Yeah, like you're not supposed to present your vulnerabilities, or, especially for girls, like you're supposed to just like say yes, be quiet, move on, which is happening less and less now as millennials are parenting. But that was really influential growing up, because then you could find yourself in friendships with people where you don't have the same value system. And so eventually there was going to be conflict, but like it was going to be extended where you didn't say anything for so long and then all of a sudden it like blows up, right? Okay, so I chat GPT'd a few quote unquote rapid fire questions about masking. So, number one, what emotion do you find yourself hiding the most?
Categorically was not allowed to be angry at all growing up, and that was reinforced all throughout my life. Yeah.
Yeah. Mine is fear. Yeah. Okay, what is something that you wish people understood about masking?
We can't control when we turn it on or off necessarily. Like there's a threshold of safety that we have to reach with certain people, and that's not really a conscious process all the time.
Yeah, I like that it's not conscious. Yeah, mine was going to be the same, just not as well spoken. It's not intentional, and it's not a way that we are trying to hurt other people. It's so like ingrained from these childhood wounds that it just sort of happens. But we are capable of undoing it. Okay, and last one, if masking had a side effect, what do you think it would be?
I mean, we already know the answer to this question. Gabor Mate's written numerous books on it. Autoimmune conditions. Suppressing your feelings causes autoimmune conditions. And that's one reason why women are vastly more susceptible to them. We're 30% more likely to develop long COVID. That's what you get when you mask. You get autoimmune conditions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that again was very well spoken. I was just going to say pain. But I mean, we could take
Chronic pain.
Chronic pain.
Totally.
We're on the same wavelength.
Yeah. Hive mind.
Yes. Well, Leslie, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm stoked for the next one.
This is a good one. It's really fun to be on the pod, and I love doing it. But selfishly for me, it's just really good for me to hear myself back. And I love listening to the episodes and seeing how you edit the conversations together. You're really good at what you do. So I love being here. Thanks for having me again.
Hi, listeners. Thank you for tuning in to the Bold, Beautiful Borderline podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode today. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your content. That is super helpful for me. It helps us find additional folks who want to listen to the show, want to feel seen, family members who want to learn, and partners who want to understand. If you want to follow along to more than just the podcast, find us on Instagram at Bold Beautiful Borderline, find me at Borderline from Hell, or head over to boldbeautifulborderline.com where there's information, resources, a place to leave a voicemail to be heard on the podcast, which I love, and just general content. All of that information can be found in the show notes. And if you want to get exclusive content, which is bonus episodes, journal prompts, worksheets, all sorts of extra stuff. Sometimes videos of me with my hair very crazy with kind of impulsive borderline rants. Head over to Patreon and consider becoming a member. That is super helpful with creating content that allows me to destigmatize BPD and all of the other wild mental health struggles that we discuss on the podcast. A huge thanks to everyone who joins on the podcast to share their story and just generally helps keep this thing alive. Especially my friend Corey Evans from the Evergreen Band. He produced and created the music that is the intro and outro for this show, as well as the cover art that was created by my husband, Talon Abbott. Their information is found in the show notes. All of the information discussed in the podcast is purely personal experience. This is not medical recommendations. This is not therapy recommendations. There's no producer for this show. It's all me.